There are some voices you don't just hear. You grow up with them. They play in the background of your life, in quiet moments, in heartbreak, in memories you didn't even realize you were making at the time. And for decades, one of those voices belonged to Gladys Knight. She wasn't just a singer. She was a feeling, a voice that could carry pain without breaking, a voice that could tell stories without saying too much, a voice people trusted. But behind that voice was a life most people never truly saw, a life filled with struggle, pressure, heartbreak, and moments where everything almost fell apart. And now, at 81, she's finally speaking about it. Not through a song, not through a performance, but in her own words. I've lived a long life, and I've learned a lot along the way. That's how she begins. And what she reveals next isn't just about fame, it's about survival. Because this isn't just the story of a legendary career. It's the story of everything it took to build it, and everything it cost to carry it. From a little girl in Atlanta, to one of the most powerful voices in music history, to a woman now ready to say goodbye. This is the story of Gladys Knight, and the truth behind her final message that left fans around the world stunned. Before the fame, before the awards, before millions of fans around the world, there was a little girl in Atlanta. Gladys Knight was born in 1944, in a time when life for a black family in the South wasn't easy. Money was tight, opportunities were limited, and the world outside her home wasn't always kind. But inside that home, there was music. Her family didn't have much, but they had something powerful, a deep connection to gospel and soul. Music wasn't just entertainment. It was comfort. It was strength. It was survival. And even as a child, Gladys stood out. Her voice wasn't just good. It was different, strong, emotional, and way beyond her years. By the time she was 7 years old, she stepped onto a stage that would change everything. Ted Mack's Amateur Hour. Most kids her age were nervous, unsure, maybe even scared. But not Gladys. She sang like someone who had already lived a lifetime. And she won. That moment didn't just bring applause. It planted a seed. Soon after, her family helped form a group, a small act that would later become known as Gladys Knight and the Pips. It started simple, just kids singing together, learning as they went. But behind those early performances, there was already pressure building. Because once people heard that voice, they wanted more. And when the world starts asking for more, it rarely stops. Success didn't come overnight. In fact, for years, it didn't come at all. Gladys Knight and the Pips traveled across the country, performing wherever they could. Small venues, crowded clubs, places where the stage was barely a stage at all. They weren't stars yet. They were just trying to survive. Long car rides became normal. Hours on the road, sometimes with barely enough money for food or a place to sleep. Cheap motels, nights filled with exhaustion, mornings that came too fast. And then there was something even harder. Segregation. They performed in cities where they weren't allowed to stay in certain hotels or eat in certain restaurants, just because of the color of their skin. So they adapted. They kept moving. They stayed quiet when they had to. And they leaned on each other. Because that's all they had. Behind the music, behind the smiles on stage, there was struggle. Real struggle. Record deals came, but they weren't fair. Contracts were signed without fully understanding the cost. Money didn't always match the success they were building. And still, they kept going. Because quitting wasn't an option. Gladys carried more than just her voice during those years. She carried responsibility. For her family. For the group. For a dream that hadn't paid off yet. And slowly, something began to shift. The crowds got bigger. The songs got stronger. The name, Gladys Knight, started to mean something. But what people didn't see was how much it had already taken from her to get there. And this was only the beginning. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, everything started to change. After years of grinding, traveling, and barely getting by, Gladys Knight and the Pips finally broke through. The music hit differently now. It wasn't just good. It connected deeply. Then came the song that would define a generation. Midnight Train to Georgia. It wasn't just a hit. It was a feeling. A story of loss, love, and choosing a different path when life doesn't go the way you planned. And just like that, Gladys Knight wasn't just performing anymore. She was everywhere. Radio stations played her voice non-stop. Concert venues sold out faster than ever. Television appearances became routine. The world had finally caught up to what she had been carrying since she was a child. But fame didn't feel the way people imagined. Behind the applause, there was pressure. Constant, heavy, and unrelenting. Every performance had to be perfect. Every note had to land. Every appearance had to match the image people expected. There was no room for exhaustion. No space to slow down. The schedule became overwhelming. Tour after tour. City after city. Night after night. It didn't matter if she was tired, sick, or emotionally drained. The show always went on. And then came the expectations. Fans didn't just love her voice, they depended on it. They saw her as strong, unbreakable, always in control. But that image came at a cost. Because the truth was, she was human. There were nights she didn't feel like singing. Moments she felt completely alone, even in a room full of people. Times when the weight of everything became too much. But she couldn't show it. Because once you become a symbol, people stop seeing the person. And while her career was rising fast, her personal life was starting to feel the pressure. Relationships became harder to maintain. Time at home became rare. The distance between who she was on stage and who she was in real life kept growing. And still, she pushed forward. Because stopping meant risking everything she had worked for. The fame brought success. The success brought recognition. But the recognition came with a price she was only beginning to understand. And slowly, that price started showing up in ways she couldn't ignore. While the world saw a superstar, Gladys Knight was quietly dealing with a life that felt far from perfect. Her relationships became one of the hardest parts of her journey. Marriage, for her, wasn't simple. It wasn't stable. And it definitely wasn't easy to maintain while living a life on the road. Her first marriage started when she was still very young. At a time when she was still figuring out who she was already trying to build a life with someone else. But fame doesn't wait for stability. As her career grew, the cracks in her personal life began to show. Long absences, emotional distance, the stress of constant touring. It all added up. And eventually, things started falling apart. Divorce wasn't just a legal process. It was emotional, painful, public. Because when you're famous, even your private heartbreak doesn't stay private. And it didn't end there. Her later relationships followed a similar pattern. Love would start strong, but struggle to survive the demands of her career and the weight of her responsibilities. There were moments of deep loneliness. Moments where, despite the fame, the awards, and the sold-out shows, she felt completely disconnected. People surrounded her all the time. Fans, managers, media. But real connection? That became harder to find. And then there were the internal battles. The stress of everything began to take a toll on her emotionally. There were periods where she felt overwhelmed. Times when the pressure felt like it was closing in from all sides. She had to stay strong for everyone else. But who was there for her? Family tensions added another layer of difficulty. Working closely with relatives in Gladys Knight and the Pips meant that disagreements weren't just professional. They were personal. Arguments didn't end when the show was over. They followed her home. And through it all, she kept performing. She kept smiling on stage. She kept delivering the voice people loved. But behind that voice was someone carrying more than most people ever saw. The kind of weight that doesn't show up in interviews. The kind that builds quietly, over time. And eventually, something inside her began to shift. By the time Gladys Knight reached the peak of her fame, she had learned something most artists discover too late. The music industry doesn't always reward you the way it promises. From the outside, it looked like success. Hit records, packed venues, a name that carried real power. But behind the scenes, things were very different. Contracts she had signed early in her career, deals made when she was young and trusting, started to reveal their true cost. Money wasn't flowing the way people assumed. For all the success, the financial side of her career was complicated. Times frustrating. Times deeply unfair. She worked endlessly, but didn't always see the full benefit of that work. And she wasn't alone. Many artists of her era faced the same reality, giving everything to their music, only to find out later that the system wasn't built for them to win. There were also struggles within her personal circle. Addiction became a shadow that touched people around her. It affected relationships, trust, and stability. Watching people she cared about go through those battles wasn't easy. And at times, it brought chaos into her life. There were moments when she questioned everything. Moments when she thought about walking away from it all. Leaving the industry. Leaving the pressure. Leaving the expectations behind. Because the truth was, it wasn't just music anymore. It had become something heavier. Something complicated. Something that demanded more than she ever expected to give. But even in those moments, she stayed. Because music was still a part of her. Even when the business side hurt, the connection to singing never fully left. Still, the experiences changed her. They made her more cautious, more aware, more guarded. The bright image of fame had faded, and in its place was a clearer, harsher understanding of what it really meant to live that life. She had survived the early struggles. She had reached the top. But now, she was facing something deeper. The realization that success doesn't protect you from pain. And sometimes, it brings even more of it. By the time the pressure, heartbreak, and hard lessons of the industry had taken their toll, Gladys Knight reached a point where something had to change. She couldn't keep going the same way. Not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually. 4 years, she had been running, from stage to stage, city to city, obligation to obligation. But now, she started slowing down. Not because she wanted to stop, but because she needed to understand what was left of her when the noise faded. And that's when faith became more than just something she grew up with. It became an anchor. Gladys had always been connected to gospel music, always rooted in something deeper than fame. But during this period, her faith became personal in a way it never had before. It wasn't about performance anymore. It was about survival. There were quiet moments, away from cameras, away from expectations, where she had to face herself honestly. The exhaustion, the disappointment, the emotional scars that had built up over decades. And instead of ignoring them, she started working through them. Slowly, carefully, she began rebuilding her life in ways that had nothing to do with charts or awards. She took on acting roles, stepping into a different kind of spotlight. Appearances on television gave her space to express herself without the same pressure that music once carried. She explored different creative paths, not because she had something to prove, but because she was learning how to live again on her own terms. And for the first time in a long time, there was balance. Not perfect balance, but something closer to peace. She also became more intentional about her personal life. Relationships were no longer just something that had to fit around her career. They mattered in a deeper way now. Family became central again. Time mattered more. And the idea of constantly chasing success started to lose its grip. But that didn't mean she stopped performing. The stage was still a part of her identity. When she sang, it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about connection, about honesty, about sharing something real with the people who had stayed with her through every phase of her life. Fans could feel the difference. There was something deeper in her voice now. Not just power, but experience. Not just control, but truth. She wasn't the same young girl who had started out in Atlanta. She had lived through too much for that. And that's what made this chapter different. She wasn't running anymore. She was choosing. Choosing when to perform. Choosing how to live. Choosing who she wanted to be. Outside of everything the world expected from her. And for a while, that choice gave her something she hadn't felt in years. A sense of control over her own life. As the years moved forward, time started doing what it always does. It caught up. Even for someone as strong and resilient as Gladys Knight, the physical demands of a lifetime in music began to show. Decades of touring, endless performances, late nights, constant travel. It all adds up. In her 70s and into her 80s, The conversations around her started to change. They weren't just about her music anymore. They were about her health. There were rumors, some quiet, some loud. At one point, confusion spread publicly when she addressed concerns after the passing of Aretha Franklin, clarifying that she too had dealt with a serious illness earlier in her life. It shook people, because for so long, Gladys had seemed untouchable, strong, steady, always there. But now, fans were being reminded of something they didn't want to think about. She was human, and she was aging. There were days when performing wasn't as easy as it once was. Energy didn't come the same way. Recovery took longer. The physical strength that once carried her through long tours began to shift. But she didn't stop immediately. That wasn't who she was. She kept going, even if it meant adjusting. Shorter performances, more rest, being careful about how much she took on. Because she understood something important. It wasn't about pushing herself to the limit anymore. It was about preserving what she still had. Still, the emotional side of aging was just as real. There's a quiet realization that comes when you've spent your entire life in motion. And suddenly, things slow down. The spotlight doesn't disappear overnight, but it softens. And with that comes reflection. Memories of everything she had been through. The highs, the lows, the people who were still there, and the ones who were gone. Aging isn't just physical. It's emotional. It's the understanding that time is no longer something you assume you have plenty of. And for Gladys, that awareness started shaping her decisions. She became more protective of her time, more selective about where she showed up, more focused on what truly mattered. Because after everything she had experienced, the fame, the struggle, the survival, she wasn't interested in proving anything anymore. She had already done that. Now, it was about something else. Something quieter. Something more personal. And slowly, that shift began leading her toward a decision she had avoided for years. For most of her life, stopping never felt like an option. But at 81, Gladys Knight started thinking about something she had always pushed aside. What does it mean to finally let go? It wasn't a sudden decision. It didn't happen overnight. It built slowly, over time. There were conversations, quiet ones, behind closed doors, talks with family, moments with close friends who had seen her at her best and at her lowest, people she trusted enough to be honest with. Because this wasn't just about ending a career. This was about stepping away from something that had defined her entire life. Music wasn't just what she did, it was who she was. So how do you walk away from that? That question stayed with her. Through performances, through quiet nights, through moments of reflection where the answer didn't come easily. But something inside her had changed. She started to feel it more clearly. The need for rest, the desire for peace, the understanding that she didn't have to keep going just to prove she still could. She had nothing left to prove. And maybe that was the point. Letting go wasn't about weakness. It was about honesty, about recognizing that every chapter has an ending, even the ones you never want to close. There was also something else. She wanted to leave on her own terms, not because she was forced to, not because something went wrong, but because she chose it. That mattered. After a lifetime of being pulled in different directions, by the industry, by expectations, by circumstances, this was one decision that was completely hers. And still, it wasn't easy. There was emotion tied to every part of it. The stage, the music, the connection with fans. Saying goodbye meant stepping away from all of that. But it also meant something deeper. It meant making space for a different kind of life. A quieter one. A more personal one. One that didn't require constant movement, constant performance, constant energy. And once she accepted that, the decision became clearer. So she prepared. Not for a final performance, but for something more personal. A message. Something she wanted to say, directly to the people who had been with her through it all. The fans. The ones who stayed. The ones who listened. The ones who made her journey what it was. And when the time came, she sat down in front of a camera, ready to say goodbye. There was no stage this time, just a quiet room, and Gladys Knight sitting in front of a camera, preparing to say something she had never said before. For decades, her voice had carried emotion through songs. Now, she had to do it without music. The recording started softly. She looked into the camera, calm but heavy with meaning. "Hi, it's Gladys." She paused for a second, like she was choosing her words carefully. "I've been thinking about this moment for a long time, and I didn't want it to come out any other way than this." She leaned forward slightly. "First, I just want to say thank you to every single one of you who stayed with me all these years." And as she spoke, the weight of her journey started to come through, not in dramatic words, but in the way she slowed down between sentences. She talked about the beginning, the small stages, the uncertainty. "I didn't always know where this road was going to take me, but somehow, you were always there." There was a quiet smile, but it didn't last long, because the message wasn't just about gratitude. It was about truth. "There were times I didn't think I could keep going." That line hit differently, because for the first time, she wasn't hiding behind strength. She continued, softer now. "Times I was tired, really tired, not just physically, but in my heart." The room felt even quieter. She didn't go into details about every struggle. She didn't have to. You could hear it. Years of pressure, loss, loneliness, survival, all in the pauses between her words. Then she shifted. "I've lived a full life, more than I ever imagined. And I'm grateful for every part of it, even the hard ones." Another pause. This one longer, like she was letting that sink in. "And now, I've come to a place where I know it's time." That was the moment fans weren't ready for. She said it gently. "I'm ready to step away." She looked directly into the camera again. "I'm not walking away because I don't love this. I'm walking away because I finally understand what I need." And what she needed was peace. "I want to rest. I want to be still. I want to spend time with the people I love, without always having to go somewhere next." There was something deeply human about that. After a lifetime of movement, she was choosing stillness. Before ending, her voice softened even more. "I love you all more than you probably know. And I carry you with me. Always." Then she smiled. Not like a performer, like someone letting go. "Thank you for everything." The video ended quietly. And for millions watching, that silence felt louder than anything she had ever sung. A voice that will never fade. After the message was released, the reaction was immediate. Fans didn't just watch it once. They replayed it, shared it, held on to it. Because what Gladys Knight gave them wasn't just a goodbye. It was closure. Across the world, people began revisiting her music. Songs that once played in the background of their lives suddenly felt different. More personal. More emotional. Midnight Train to Georgia wasn't just a classic anymore. It felt like a memory, like a goodbye of its own. Fans shared stories, where they first heard her voice, who they were with, what that moment meant, because her music had never just been music. It had been part of people's lives. And that's not something that disappears. Other artists began speaking out too, not just about her talent, but about her strength. Because surviving in that industry for decades, and still standing with grace, isn't something everyone can do. Her influence stretched far beyond her own generation. And even now, it continues. But what stood out most wasn't just her career. It was how she chose to end it. She made the decision herself. Quietly, honestly, on her own terms. And that matters. Because after everything she had been through, the pressure, the struggles, the expectations, this was one thing she controlled completely. There's a moment in life where everything slows down, where the noise fades, and you finally hear yourself clearly. For her, this was that moment, and she listened. Now, the stage may be quiet, the tours may be over, but her voice? That doesn't go anywhere. It stays in the songs, in the memories, in the way people feel when they hear her voice come through a speaker. Years from now. Because voices like hers don't fade. They settle into something deeper. Something lasting. And maybe that's the real ending. Not silence, but a different kind of presence. Outro, modified for script ending. So, what did you feel when you heard her final message? Did it feel like goodbye? Or something more personal than that? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. We tell the stories behind the voices you think you know, and the truths you've never heard. Until next time, take care.